Viewer discretion is advised.
Ottawa Senators. Losing to the Penguins seems like a theme to you guys. You really do play the most boring brand of hockey I have ever seen. A nice pick on Alexander Daig. Did I pronounce that right? I know this roast was pretty weak, but what else can I say about an average team that has never won a...
And finally, the Senators, Eugene Melnyk. I saved Eugene Melnyk for last because after researching him, I discovered he really is a phenomenal asshole. Melnyk started out in medical publishing and then graduated to Big Pharma, where his company would reverse engineer generics for the marketplace, which is kinda like stealing. In 2008, he was sued for accounting fraud, and fraud is a pretty good word for this jerk, who is the sole owner of the Senators, whom he purchased in 2003. It's worth noting that he's from Toronto, Barbados, and has no real ties to Ottawa. And he once publicly threatened to move the team if attendance didn't improve, solicited the general public when he needed a liver transplant to find a donor, and is generally hated by the fans, who even started a GoFundMe to get Melnyk's ass out of ownership. They have raised a grand total of 10 G's, which I'm sure is what Melnyk wipes his ass with every time he takes a shit. Fuck this dude. Well, thank you.
With a name that sounds like a great place to buy some radials, Canadian Tire Center is the dumpster that the Senators throw rancid garbage and lighter fluid into. The building holds Ottawa's Sports Hall of Fame, and when fans come in, they can state their blood type so Melnyk can keep it in a database and later steal the fan's liver while he or she falls asleep watching a disinterested Matt Duchene play hockey. That's not true, but it probably should be.
The Ottawa Senators could actually do this. They've shot past the expectation of being a playoff doormat for the Rangers or Canadiens. They're going toe-to-toe with a Stanley Cup champion Penguins, for God's sakes. They're going to do it. They've made it to OT. They're going to another cup. They... Oh my merciful God!
Shameful display!
Let this play set the impetus for this upcoming monologue. The Senators have unfortunately been sentenced back to reality after being chucked off a precipice last year. That reality being a struggling mid-tier squad with more holes and questions than it can answer. It's not something that can be identified like Finding Waldo, but a myriad of issues that plague the team. Erik Karlsson is playing some of the worst hockey of his career and may be demanding a trade. That imposing forward core is lost and getting nothing done. And the feel-good story of Craig Anderson has taken a massive turn for the worse. Everything has been stabbed 20 times like Caesar. The sudden boom under Guy Boucher seems to have been a fluke. The constant mockery of the 1-3-1 in hockey circles and forums everywhere is getting far more reinforcement. The so-called Canada Wall has crumbled and fallen like the one in Berlin. Even after 1 year, it appears that this stereotypical Bond villain has overstayed his welcome. It's not at all because the 1-3-1 is an incredibly demanding scheme that is easy to pick apart when every piece is not at optimal performance. It requires speed, awareness, and a blazingly quick counterattack. Just like in Tampa Bay, Guy Boucher may have worn out the Sens. He has learned nothing. This can also be stated with Air GM Pierre Dorion, whom took the reins after Brian Murray retired a few years ago. I would make a prediction about where he will go, but I traded that future just like Dorion for immediate relief. It really reared its ugly head last season when he overpaid Vancouver and gave them a good prospect in Jonathan Dahlen for a declining Alex Burrows. Let me reiterate, this guy got fleeced in a trade by Jim Benning. It didn't just end there either. The promise of shoring up the top six and replacing Mark Mathod in the offseason was of critical importance to Ottawa. Dorion shat his pants and did nothing. Until recently. It has finally happened, boys. Matt Duchene is finally free. No longer will he be completely miserable and discontent in the hell of Colorado. He will be the slight upgrade to Kyle Turris that this team desperately needs. All it cost Ottawa was their first-round selection from this year, next year's first-round pick, another draft pick, and the Hamburglar to shed salary. Dorion, how the fuck did you make the bumbling Joe Sakic look like a genius? The man had absolutely no leverage, and you still gave him the haul he desired. Even worse, the trade has backfired in the worst conceivable way. Kyle Turris is performing well in Nashville and has become an important cog in their machine. What has Duchene done since going to Ottawa? Shit his pants and done all but nothing. By God, it's almost as if Matt Duchene is massively overrated and can't carry a line or a team as he was hyped to do. In fact, we can almost say that Pierre Dorion destroyed the team chemistry by taking away a key piece in Turris for a high-risk gamble. It has not worked at all. And Duchesne is complaining about why he keeps getting compared to Kyle Turris? I wonder why. This year has been a disaster for them so far, but this is sadly far from the main issue with the team. The real elephant in the room is Eugene Melnyk. Fucking Melnyk, a sniveling, spineless little shit who could give as few fucks about the goodwill towards the city as you could imagine. I could go on and on about his histrionics, his eccentricities, the way he's utterly embarrassed the city he's supposed to represent, but for this, I'm going to bring about a more recent example. Harken back to December 16th, 2017, a time of celebration for the Senators franchise. They were on the eve of hosting their first ever outdoor game, and the eyes of the NHL were on Ottawa. Normally, an owner would use this time to promote the team and the city they play for, but not our old fuckwit Eugene. Let's first start by chucking the fanbase under the entire transit system for not showing up to games. Sure, we all had a hearty laugh at the Sens being unable to sell out playoff games last season, but there's asterisks. Primarily, the fact that the stadium is located in a western suburb that is inaccessible by public transport and is a nightmare to navigate by car. Secondly, prices are exorbitant. Eugene has been bleeding the fans dry for years now. Even to goddamn park it costs an Ottowan his or her soul. Third, Sens fans despise Melnyk, like literally want him Mussolini'd in front of Ottawa's municipal buildings as soon as humanly possible. I mean, this is hyperbole, you say. How can a city hate a man that fails to properly market his franchise, force the greatest player in their team's history to retire in a different uniform by fucking up contract negotiations, consistently keeps costs as low as possible for the sake of profits, and cries wolf to try and get a new stadium to get all of those big boy bucks? People love that sort of thing. The big city is sure to fix your attendance woes. Look at the adulation that he gets for threatening to relocate them right before their fucking team alumni game. Do you have any tact? Oh right, you don't. You're a petty self-indulgent charlatan who cares for nothing more than his wallet. This city gave you a fucking liver to extend your life, and this is how you repay them? Remember that casino you lost out on? Remember how much of a bitch fit you threw at the city of Ottawa for not bending over to your will? Why should they care about you? You're not a citizen, you live in fucking Barbados to escape Canadian tax regulations. Eugene truly needs to be triggered by Russians and more journalists that call him out for his bullshit. That will improve his goodwill in the city, just like the Senators themselves, a team crumbling from the inside out. From the absolute highs of their playoff run to this on-ice abortion, the team represents the owner that dangles them like a marionette, a hollow shell, a lifeless lump forced to move by the lust of currency. In the end, it will most likely conclude with the city giving in to this bastard's demands, or him packing their bags and moving to a city that will somehow tolerate his bullshit. Eugene is not going to be selling anytime soon, and all sides seem to be at an impasse. I personally find it funny how Melnyk bitches about how Russia unfairly treated Ukrainians for generations, but he's doing the same goddamn thing. Either way, Melnyk does not like to lose. Let us hope that he continues to do so for the sake of Ottawa.
The beginning. It is a time of optimism for a team. In Seattle, there is much excitement about the Kraken and their upcoming expansion draft. The talent available for them to select is outstanding, and teams will be desperate to bribe them with brilliant futures to take on bad contracts or protect certain players. But it wasn't always like this. Consider the Ottawa Senators. Things were rough. This was going to be their logo. Looks terrible, doesn't it? The expansion draft in 1992 was far more unforgiving for both them and the Tampa Bay Lightning. For the low price of $45 million, you too could get the table scraps of every other franchise in the league. Most players available to them were minor league journeymen, fringe players, draft flops, has-beens, never-weres, and the occasional highly paid veteran that neither team could probably afford. At goalie, it was even more barren. Most teams used a loophole that required a backstop to only have one full game played in the NHL to be exposed, which is how we get the brilliance of Scott Sharples playing one game with the Flames, and U.S. Olympic hero Ray LeBlanc playing one game with the Chicago Blackhawks. Others offer goalies that hadn't played in the NHL in a few seasons, but Washington tried something a little more unorthodox. They tried to sign Bernie Wolf to a contract to expose him. Bernie Wolf was a 40-year-old financial planner who last played professional hockey in 1979. The NHL obviously told them to fuck off with this. Plan B was signing Steve Weeks to be their draft fodder. He at least played in the NHL that season. In addition to the barren wastes, teams would be limited to selecting 2 players per team before they were off limits. Knowing this, most teams simply swap players to dangle them to their unsuspecting prey. Despite the challenge, this was no issue for Mel Bridgman. After a long NHL career of goonery, smashing people's faces into the ice, and bruising net front presence, Bridgman went to a different school to get his MBA. probably with a minor in toughness. With no executive experience at any level of hockey, the Senators chose him as their first GM. He and his men got right to work on researching the players available, and their mighty talisman was developed for this moment. The laptop. 6 pounds of unimaginable data. A 9.5-inch display. 640 by 480 viewing power. 20 megabytes of hard drive space. A powerful 20 megahertz processor. A 1.44 megabyte floppy drive. 644 kilobytes of RAM. And it was all theirs for about $4,000. Tech has come a long way since that time. I think they would have preferred that. Come the day of the expansion draft, Bridgman and company confidently walked over to their table to find out the major flaw in their plan. They never charged the laptop battery. Oh shit. They tried plugging it in, but the outlet at their table didn't work. Double fuck. Better yet, nobody bothered to make hard copies of their data. Killing spree. The Senators would be running blind or, if they're lucky, on memory. It's not like they could have gone up to the commissioner and said, can we have a few hours to charge up our laptop battery a bit? We needed to do things like draft and exist. They would have been laughed out of the building a tad earlier than they did. There were no issues in the goaltender or defenseman selections, barring the random cast-offs Ottawa selected. Out of who they picked, the only ones with significant NHL experience were Peter Sidorkiewicz and Brad Shaw. The rest is a batch of who the fuck are these people? I could have made up the names on this list and you probably would have believed me. But come forward selection time, things were getting hairy. The diligent notes became random scribbles on paper. During this time, they did pick Sylvain Turgeon, Mike Peluso, and Stanley Cup champion Mark Lamb. Imagine going from a dynasty in Edmonton to fucking Ottawa. About as bad a reaction as Laurie Boschman had to being selected as the captain's sacrifice. But as long as the team was tough and gritty, talent need not apply. Their selections reinforced that. Then at pick 23, shit went haywire. Needing more goonery to go with their goonery, the Senators selected Todd Ewan from the Canadiens. Ineligible. 2 players had been picked from Montreal. Turgeon and Tampa had picked Frederick Chabot, whom Ottawa never crossed off their list when selected. With this embarrassment, Mel Bridgman did a time-honored Canadian tradition. He sheepishly walked to the podium and apologized profusely. Ottawa apologizes, he would ashamedly say before walking back to his table. They then used the selection to pick Mark Freer from Philadelphia. Valid pick. Draft continues on. Everything remains normal until pick 40. The draft is nearing its end, but Ottawa has another gritty physical pick up their sleeve. Todd Hawkins from Toronto. He was ineligible. The Lightning had already picked Brian Bradley and Keith Osborne from the Leafs. But what was the issue here? There were picks 36 and 37. Cue another sulking confession from Bridgman. Ottawa apologizes. He goes back to the table and talks it over with his men. They have a new plan. Back to the podium he goes to select C.J. Young from Calgary. Also ineligible. Young wasn't even eligible to be picked. They had the wrong list with him on it. So cue another groveling session. Ottawa apologizes. Fuck off now! Third time was the charm. Darcy Lowen from Buffalo. Valid pick. The final pick was good too. And thus we solve who would win in a fight. A group of fledgling hockey men, or one laptop battery. Technology is a flawless victory. The Senators went for an unorthodox plan. While Tampa Bay picked at least a couple of guys with decent pedigree, skill, and potential upside, the Senators picked players who could probably fit in well in the movie Slapshot. Tough guys, lesser talented tough guys, and some random dudes from the Fight Club. Fighting, unfortunately, doesn't get you wins in hockey. They maybe had a passable player here or there, but nothing that said NHL caliber roster. And before you ask, none of the players selected in this draft lasted longer than 3 seasons on the team. In honor of the cringeworthy performance of the draft, the team itself created a spectacle of cringe before their home opener. The game itself was a stunning victory over Montreal. In fact, they won even more games that year. 9 more. Ottawa apologized all over the ice against their opponents. They were undoubtedly one of the worst teams in NHL history, and for good reason. They lacked things like talent and playing ability. The team itself was a circus full of ineptitude, but it was a sign of true heritage. Don't feel bad for Mel Bridgman. Even if he was completely over his head as GM, he only got fired 1 year into his tenure. I wonder if they threw a laptop battery at him as he left the office.